Sweet.
The other thing is that we can edit.
We can actually edit it.
I mean, and actually,
we can always edit
we
all
can
of
always,
it.
we can always edit it. We just don't.
I just can't be fucking bothered.
Right.
Totally.
No, exactly.
Don't edit if you don't have to.
Exactly.
Right?
Except maybe put in a cool sound effect. Exactly.
We have to figure out. Wait, get your cowboy hat. This is the cowboy hat size.
Was it funny hat time?
I only brought my cowboy.
Dude.
All right, this is
she's
what I
got
brought
a
it for.
chaperone for you. The Cthulhu mask.
For a half second, I pictured putting Scott's underwear in my head. I had to stop myself.
Welcome to the Silly Hats podcast.
Okay.
So the microphone's all the way over there, so you'll speak with authority towards it.
Right. Well, so listening to Charles,
You sounded good.
I think we sounded fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to talk extra loud just in case. I'm just kidding.
My microphone is unnecessary. You're going to look at the settings, James,
Right, it's
and
like
you're going
turned
to
all
confirm
the way
to
down.
me that I have literally everything turned as far down as I can.
Are we ready?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
doing it.
So
Let's
here we
do
go.
it.
So welcome to the Desire Line. And for once, we're all in the same room. And that's pretty exciting. And by all of us, I mean way more than we normally have.
Yeah.
And so I'll give these gentlemen an opportunity to introduce themselves.
Okay.
And I guess we'll start on my left.
Sure. So I'm Nathan Clough. Friends with James. Friends with Jess. Looking forward to being closer friends.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm co-owner of Arms and Armor in Minneapolis and a historical fencer. And I'm excited to talk to you guys.
And we've already met Charles, but you can...
I'm Charles Lynn. I am an instructor at Capital Coincidences Festivals in Washington, D.C.
we're here at... Where are we?
Valley Falls, Kansas.
We're in Valley Falls, Kansas.
In case you're wondering why, because that's where the armor's at.
Right. Yeah, so the Chivalric Fighting Arts Symposium.
You got it.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is an event that's meant to be held annually?
Annually or every other year, depending on pandemics.
Right. So there hasn't been one
For a while.
for a little while.
Yeah.
And
The last one was in Virginia.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was 2020? 2019?
19, I think. Yeah.
Holy crap. That's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so since 2019, Nathan and I got some armor figured out. And,
A little bit.
Yeah, and so we decided once this event went live that we were going to come visit. And so now we're here, and it's been a pretty awesome weekend so far. We've gotten one and a half days in the can, right? And so what did you do today?
Me, I suited up, took Bob Charette's class, took Jess's falling in armor, out of armor class, ate dinner, put this on. It's a big element of my day. The transformation is complete.
Oh god, I bet you that mic is coming in really.
It's perfect.
Awesome.
They need our laughter.
Okay, and then what about you?
What about me?
So you taught some classes.
I taught a couple classes today. I mean, I think we're going to talk about this, but my big personal goal this weekend, besides teaching and like hanging out with all y'all, was to get. I have this long project that has been in various stages for a new arming coat, and I wanted to see if it busted like on its maiden voyage, and it kind of did a little bit, but not terribly. So I'm excited about that.
Did you bring it up by any chance?
No, because I'm an idiot.
Right. Honestly, it might just be worth it for you to run and grab it. Honestly,
You can just edit in a picture of it. Or run.
or run. Yeah.
Watch out for the spiral staircase.
I'll do my vaudeville routine.
And so for my part, I did. I basically just did everything that you did. I did Bob Schurett's class, which was the first part was probably my favorite knowledge building class of the day, and probably it'll be my favorite. First 30 minutes would probably be my favorite knowledge building moments of the whole weekend, right? Which were articulating clearly how aspects of your armor work, right? So like, what are these like little rings or little points, like the steel lips on the breastplate or on the
stops and
right. And so like to have him go through all of the ways that you could score points in the armored fencing game, right? And to demonstrate like how these things are effective and really set the mindset, right? For me, it was like, okay,
what are we doing here?
Yeah, what the hell is it to fight in armor?
Yeah.
And I think a lot can be said, and we'll probably devote a whole podcast to this at some point, is just talking through the way the armored fencing game works.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what are the assumptions that we're making? What are the aspects that we're looking to simulate or approximate?
What did the old masters tell us to try and do?
Right, exactly. Right. And how do we inform those assumptions and approximations and simulations, and stuff like that? But that's not going to be the point of today's podcast. But that was my favorite part of the experience so far. We were just saying that Bob's explanation of the various aspects of armor, how you score, and how you should consider your opponent's armor.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's really the game.
Yeah.
Right? The game is like, how do I get into that thing?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then like taking an inventory of all the ways that his armor is designed to prevent you from doing that easily.
Yeah.
Right?
Did I tell you when we talked for our armor podcast, did I tell you about the first time I fought Bob?
No.
All right. So for any of y'all who don't know Bob, he's a pretty large, rather intimidating, potentially man. Like, he's kind and lovely.
He's definitely a man.
Yes.
He's rather intimidating, potentially.
Yeah. Correct. Did I say that backwards? Definitely a man. Yes. But yeah. So I mean, to me, he's looming and large, and he had this new to him suit at the time, and but a very experienced armored fighter, right? And so yeah, you do that. Like, Bob and I face across the field. I'm like, there's some openings, and Bob literally takes 2 steps and then goes to his body, and like all these gaps closed.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
I'm about to get hosed, right?
That's amazing. But that just demonstrates.
Yeah, and he just rotated. I don't know what he did, but to my mind, it was almost like a roly-poly rolling up, right? He just went, and like things disappeared.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It was super cool.
And I have a much better way to kind of like. I'm glad you didn't tell me that story initially. Right, because after I got a chance to experience that today, experience it by wearing my armor, but also experience it by listening to Bob explain that in a very complete way.
Yeah.
Right. And so then for you to give that account afterwards, like, I'm perfectly able to contextualize that.
Yeah, it's super cool.
So then I went to your classes, and I participated in part of them, and I did some free fencing with some folks, and then that was basically it for me because I got tired.
Yeah.
You did some more stuff though. Like, I think you were with us for most of the day, and then you eventually.
Yeah, for most of it. So yeah, Bob's class, armor, what is it good for, was awesome. It was great. Helped really think about it. And then I messed around with some spears I'd made to try and have fun here, and then took Scott's German tradition spear fighting class, which was super cool. I'd taken at WMAW one time, like Monisha Khorassani taught a Persian armored spear class, but I didn't have any armor then. And I was, it was fascinating. But that class only made it made some general conceptual sense to me, but it's super awesome to take a Lichtenauer spear tradition class. So I was like, oh yeah, that's Sukin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they'll do the upper winding.
Right.
And it was great.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's been our weekend, and I think we really ought to have a whole discussion, a whole post
Breakdown.
CFAS breakdown, right, where we get to really talk about go into a little bit more depth about the way that the armor game works, right? And how to think about it, how to start getting into armor. But so today we have a bunch of you all, and it's so fun for me because I don't actually belong in this group of people.
One of these things is
I
not
made
like the other.
I made an eyelet today, so
Crafton.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was assigned.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she did well.
Very
work.
good. Yeah.
Right.
Teach you how to fish.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, but yeah. So the theme
Has there was fishing. Wait a second.
Yeah.
the theme of today's podcast is varying degrees of art and craft.
Yeah.
Right. So two words that go together all the time. Have gone together for my kids since they were in their lowest grades, and they've gone together for me my whole life. And so I think what sort of the catalyst behind this, right, was an anecdote that you shared with me in the lunch line today.
Yeah. No, because James and I have talked about it privately a lot, and then also a lot on the podcast about art and what is art, and how that's a migrating meaning over time, and maybe we've arrived at our own definitions. But I was telling him a story about a Mason friend of mine that I was chatting with, who we got to talking about. There's an artist in Kansas City that does dry stone sculptures, really, right? He elevates that idea of a dry stone wall into eggs and all sorts of crazy stuff. But one of the things he did was a wall that walked its way through a neighborhood into the museum, by the end of it moving to the beginning of it, every couple of days or whatever. And lots of volunteers helped and whatever. And so this wall moved. And my Mason friend was very upset about it. And he thought that it was denigrating his craft because art is useless and pointless, and that walls should have a point.
Well, but by definition, right?
Right. Yeah, that was his definition of art. It had to be useless. And I was like, oh, tell me more. I'm going to let you have your piece, but I have so many feelings, right? And so anyway, so I was telling James a story, and it arose feelings in his heart as well, and so here we are.
And so so for me, yeah, right. So without spending too much more time thinking about that particular formulation, right? I'm very interested in art, and I'm very interested in its relationship to craft.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm interested in thinking about various domains where those applications or various practices where art and craft are manifest, right? So and that question, because it's basically he made this sort of proposition that art is a practice or an application of a practice that can only happen in a space. I don't understand it exactly. It can where there's no utility, there's no
yeah, that's the point.
That's the point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a weird thing. That's a weird idea for me, right? But
I've heard that idea floated before. It's not a new thought.
Right. It's very
You see this in fashion all the time,
Hmm.
right? Whenever a fashion designer is asked to do something avant-garde, then they're like, oh, I have to make it impossible,
Right.
right? And
Right.
it's like the low-hanging fruit of art.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we've talked a lot about what art could be, what art means, right? If you Google the definition of art and those types of things, right? But then, what I love about our community is that we have, and this is again why I'm the odd man out in this group, is that you guys are all exemplar of members of this community, right? Who engage in the practice of historical fencing, HEMA, whatever, but also for whatever reason, you've been compelled to engage in an adjacent practice, or maybe as part of how you conceive of yourself, you are all doing this other thing where you're engaging in a practice that's more commonly, at least in our society, or maybe traditionally, conceived of as a craft, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
You guys tracking?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm interested in why you connected those things, and I think eventually I'll be interested in how we might connect art and craft, given your experience with them in your adjacent practices, how we might connect art and craft to our practice of historical fencing,
Mhm.
right? And so we have why don't you give your bona fides there?
I prefer to pronounce it bona fides. So I came to this through, everyone came to this through a roundabout route, right? It's not like we were born into a feudal situation where we were expected to be sword fighters, right? At least not this life. And so I was a professor of political geography for a decade and studying social theory and social movements mostly. And then 10 years ago, there was a Groupon for sword fighting classes. And I was like, goddamn. And I bought it for me and my friend, and HEMA was discovered, right? And I'd loved swords my whole life, and made them out of sticks and everything, right?
Yeah.
Like made a forge out of my dad's shop vac, running it backwards in the backyard as a 10-year-old after reading fantasy novels, and probably gave myself zinc poisoning, pounding, galvanized nails into daggers and stuff. But I never thought about it as some kind of career path or anything, right? So I was doing sword fighting for several years, doing mostly German longsword stuff, and then I discovered that Arms and Armor, with the maker of swords and weapons, was 3 miles from my house, and that the owner of Arms and Armor was really close friends with my fencing coach, who I was becoming really close friends with.
Yeah.
And so they eventually, I went and hung out with them, and at this time, so the Oakshott Institute, right, is the sister organization of Arms and Armor in many ways. And so we have all of Ewart Oakshott's old swords and stuff he collected, and I was invited to be on the board of the Oakshott Institute largely because of my academic position.
Yeah.
Right? So I had a PhD, I worked at the university, and helped professionalize the board. And then I only had to, my job was 150 miles away, because that's the way the academy works, right? You get a job where you can take it. And my wife had a better job than me in Minneapolis, so I would drive up to Duluth 2 days a week. So then 3 days a week, weekdays, I had course prep and grading, but I had time. So I started going down to Arms and Armor and hanging out, like volunteering, which mostly I just wasted materials and time for everyone there, but they were very nice. And over the course, yeah, exactly.
Right.
I was like, "How's this work?" They're, oops. And eventually, I was getting tired of the commute, and the university was restructuring, so they pretty much fired the 25 most junior faculty in the liberal arts.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And, at that point, I was like, I'm not going to move somewhere else to do this job. This is my home. I love it here. And my wife and I decided that we would invest in arms and armor because my business partner, Chris Poor, who started it, 64. So about half the company, kept doing sword fighting and have spent the last five years, I guess, working more or less full-time there. And the last 3 years, absolutely full-time, trying to learn this craft of making these things.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And being taught by just some of the best master craftsmen out there. Yeah. And it's been amazing that my job has been to go there 40 or sometimes 50 hours a week and be taught by the leading lights how to make these things. Yeah. So yeah, that's that path.
Awesome.
I'll tell the codpiece story when you ask.
Yeah. So then I want to bring it to Charles, right? So one of the aspects in which your experience is different is that you don't have masters, right? So
none of us do.
Well, he does, right? So,
I know. I was joking.
But you know what I'm saying? So like, you don't have people who you can apprentice under that are, you know, you have resources that you can.
Yeah.
And you can go ahead and.
Did you seriously just gesture at me?
No, I'm like just like, come on.
This is my master.
No, we
You're embarrassing me.
Yeah. No.
So wait, before you explain, what do you do exactly, right? So, and how did you come to?
How did I come to this? Yeah. I've been doing HEMA, early KDF since 2014, but 2019 I signed up for the Long Point Heavy Pentathlon without having a harness. It's just like I committed and I knew it's do or die. Show up with it, or you're not doing the entire thing.
This is 2019?
2019, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I've been sewing for about 3 years through that period. But through that, I had to hack together harness that did the job. Just get me across the finish line. My thinking was not kind of at the level of the people around here are right now, but more of like what is a minimally viable product, and once I have that, are there any additions I can make from that? Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to do it cheap. I was trying to do it in a way where I interfaced with each layer as much as possible at whatever level I had, whatever my ability was. So I started by buying an off-the-shelf doublet, and I was like, okay, everybody says this, that the waist needs to be tight. So how am I going to do it? I did a very lazy, waist reduction. It was just ugly as sin.
You put you folded it and put a couple of whip stitches.
You fold it, you put a few whip stitches, and it does the job. It's not ideal, but that's where it was. And that was the first touch where I was like, okay, I did that. I thought about my particular performance needs. I made a modification, and then I see the result of that modification. And it's a very empowering experience where you are actually enhancing your art. You're actually enhancing your performance, or in another way you can think about it is removing the obstacles. The obstacles are all the modern problems with production processes and the stuff that we have. Mm. So, 2019, I roll up to Long Point with, janky doublet, mail that I've hacked together, off-the-shelf items that I've purchased and modified, cut down, slimmed up,
I'm going to call your timeline into question just a hair, because I think when I met you, it was Effectual New York.
Yes.
In 2018.
Yes.
And you had already been hard at work on your harness, right?
I signed up a year in advance.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so I signed up.
So you began that. So you were already deep into this process.
I was thinking to myself, like, okay, I knew what good, like I had a rough idea what good armor was, right? I knew that what I was wearing wasn't it, but I knew that like I had to put in the time to interface directly with the physical objects.
I want to clarify too. Yeah. When I say like you were hard at work when I met you, like you were literally working on your armor when I met you. Like,
Oh, really?
yeah, you were under the tent. It was pouring rain. Do you remember this?
No, I don't.
No, it was pouring rain in the field, fictionally New York, and
Yeah.
I was like, I ran under your tent
Yeah.
because I needed a place to not get poured on, and it was you, William Boucher, and probably Joe Lilly, and maybe some other guy,
Yeah.
and you were just like, it's like working away on your armor.
Oh,
It was
God.
great. It was really
Oh
funny.
my goodness, yeah.
So, like, literally, you were working on your armor at that time.
That's
a year
true,
in advance.
yeah.
That's really crazy.
Yeah, I mean, like I knew it had to be like the time scale of it was like I can't think about purchasing an object and then putting it on me and it working exactly how I wanted to. So then I have to think, okay, if I can't buy it, then I have to acquire the skills so that I can either take an off-the-shelf object and modify it or just construct it whole. And you know, it's just like, okay, if that's what it takes, you know, that I'm going to do it, you know, mainly because I don't want to be the guy who just like doesn't do harness and then just drops a ton of money right away, like with a picture and takes it to the armor and like this thing here,
Yeah.
and just do it.
You decided to wait 4 or 5 years before you did that.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm going to learn how to drive. I'm going to have a beater car, you know, you know, like learn to drive stick, you know, like I don't know how to drive stick, but like, you know, theoretically, if I wanted to be like a real driver, I would have a period of humility where I acknowledge that the product I make is not good, but the product is the evidence of the work. Like everything you see is a product of what I have done, and is not someone else's handicraft on me.
I think what you just described there as a period of humility is so unbelievably important, and I want to circle back to that.
Mhm.
Right? That's like
It's super.
right because
Yeah,
you
legit.
hinted at it too. Right?
Yeah.
Right. But then let us just juxtapose your circumstances now, right? So like, and also you've moved past the armor, right? So not, if you're known for anything in the historical fencing community, it's not for your armor or your armor modifications per se.
Yeah. Is it the shit posting or is it, or is it the other
shitty
stuff?
idea number 8? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brent memes.
Yeah, the Brent memes. Yeah. I honestly I don't dwell too much on what I'm known for, but I think where you're going is that, and especially for this talk, is at some point I decided, hey, I'm actually capable of making clothing now.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, it's like the initial versions were still bad, but I was like, okay, I'm going to be like an artist who just okay, I'm really bad now. Who's the artist that just did haystacks for a while?
Oh.
Yeah.
Anyways,
People should Google that.
Yes, Google it. Edit it in.
She'll
Yeah.
link it in the description.
Yeah,
Yeah, it'll be fine.
But
I won't. I'll
But
forget.
basically, like I iterate on doublets, right? Because it's just an iconic thing. The commercial solutions are pretty bad, and they improve performance in harness significantly.
Yeah.
I start looking for examples, and I'm just like, I'm forced to confront art. Right? We have very few surviving examples, and so I have to look at images, and I have to look at Charles the Bold, and I'm like, okay, what is he wearing? Why is he wearing it? Like the art is inescapable, even though I'm just looking for craft at this point.
Mhm.
I'm just
Yeah.
like, how is it constructed? Where are the pieces? And you know, I come across images that like look like this,
Mhm.
you know, but like for me, it dazzles everyone else because of the shininess. But for me,
Well, and your bulbous figure.
no, but you know, for me, the hard part is just like trying the iterative process of dialing in this fit.
Yeah.
You know, and it's still a work in process, but like that's where I actually put in the work. I just bought this fabric somewhere,
Mhm.
you know. But kind of the way that I've gone once I was forced to confront the art of, for example, like portraiture. What are they trying to convey?
Mm.
Right?
Mhm.
When someone makes a portrait, when they paint a portrait, what are they trying to communicate? And you see people with portraits that look like this, you know, from
From the side.
from
Yeah.
the side, right?
Mhm.
Super clean looking, you know, and just like really just listen and watch. So if there's like a humility in craft, there's also like a humility in the art where you're like, you look at the thing and you say, this thing has something important to tell me. Right. And I really have to listen to what that might be.
Right.
I don't know if that's where you're going, but
well, that was exactly what I was hoping you'd say.
Okay.
Nice work.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, so now, like, let's talk about you.
Oh, okay.
Right. So you're kind of a pioneer in this domain, at least from Charles. Charles certainly regards you as such, right? As a historical fencer, but also as a historical fencer who decided to take their historical reconstruction in this direction.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Why?
Money.
Yeah.
Listen. When I first got into swords, it was on stage, as we've talked about before. And so I needed clothes to perform in. And I had $0. But I absolutely grew up sewing with my grandmother's. I could borrow my grandma's extra sewing machine. And like I had 8th grade home ec. So like anyone from Kansas, I was like, well, I can do this.
Yeah.
Right? That's all it takes. So I made myself a really sweet reproduction of the dress the wife wears in Braveheart, because it's totally medieval.
Mm-hmm.
This was the 90s. Let me have it. I was 18.
It was awesome. Right? That movie
It was so good.
Yeah.
It was so good. But yeah, so I mean, and it just kind of started there. And then I slammed my stuff out and it was ridiculous, but it was great. Actually, I think I hand sewed that whole thing because I don't think I had my grandma's sewing machine yet. Doesn't matter. So I slammed that out, performed in it for a while, made myself a second outfit that next year. And then like people in my performance troupe were like, yo, can you make me a shirt? Because like I don't have $30, but I can spend $5 in muslin. And can you make me a shirt? Yeah, I can make you a shirt. You're my friend. I'm not charging you anything. And so like I got hours and hours and hours of this iterative process. Like every shirt I made for somebody got better. I learned a lot about varied bodies and like how to fit the body in front of me, which is a whole thing. Because you don't realize when you're making clothes, you don't realize you're doing this. I'm sure this happens with swords too. That you make up rules about how it works. Mm. So like a rule I might say is, oh, well, if I want a shirt to drop off somebody, I can measure the circumference of I can measure across their shoulders, like to the outside of their shoulders. And if I make a circle that big, it will fit their chest, right? Assuming that they don't have a belly or, something else. But like if they're a tall, thin man, that's going to work. That's always going to work. If I measure outside their shoulders, it'll fit their chest. Some people's shoulders sit inside their chest. Mm. It's rare, but I've known too. It's and you don't see it when you look at them, right? But I hadn't realized that was a rule that wouldn't work till I ran across, right? And so like you learn all these sorts of things. Charles and I have talked about rules you learn about bodies. Anyway, so I kept doing that, and then I got into HEMA, and then like same thing because I am a woman and I'm small, so nothing in HEMA is going to fit me. So if I want to have something fit me, I might as well freaking make it. I have the skills. Yeah. And then, and then when I got into armor, it's the same thing. Nothing's going to fit me.
Yeah.
I'm going to make everything. Everything's going to be custom because I don't have a choice.
Right.
So like initially the choice was from poverty, and then it was poverty of money.
Right.
And now it's a poverty of
access.
Access.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And then now I'm just a fucking snob.
Right. Then you got. Well, I think that that's relevant, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, eventually you become a snob about your stuff.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So I was
Uh-huh.
I was wondering. So I would love to not like I moderated the beginning because I wanted to get the discussion going, but I want to hear you guys just contribute when you feel it's relevant. But I want to like, what about rules? Like, so like, so there's a discovery of a kind of a truth, right, in just the making, right, in just the iterative process.
Yeah.
There's it you discover like some ideas or concepts or truths or whatever. And then it's a process of refining them or just learning that they were wrong or whatever, right?
Yeah. And like some of the rules, like you come into a shop that's been there for 40 years, there are tons of rules, and some of them are just stupid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're rules based, like, some of the rules at Arms and Armor are like, we have the same wooden stools we've had for 20 years, and they break all the time, and we just screw them back together. But when they break, we will save the legs to make dagger handles out of, because they're maple, even though we don't use maple, because there was a time when we ran out of wood. And that rule is dumb. I'm looking at you guys. But there's other rules that are really important and brilliant. Like, so the best sword maker that no one knows is Greg Benson, who is one of the guys at Arms and Armory. He's worked there since the late 80s, and he makes the rapiers, right? And his craft, he's an artist. And like, I'm not an artist. I'm trying to learn to be a craftsman, right? But Greg's straight up an artist,
right? And
we can talk about that. But like, his rule that he's trying to teach me is like, he calls it like the 6-sided look. It's like, you've got a rapier you're making, and you put it in a vise, and you make everything you can see from this position perfect, and then you flip it.
Yep.
And then a whole bunch of the stuff you did was wrong, but you fix it on this side.
Yeah.
And then you flip it.
Yeah.
Until you can flip it, and it's perfect.
Yeah.
Right? And this is an additive and subtractive process, and it takes me a long time, and it takes him not that long anymore, right? Because he understands the shape that things should be. He understands the texture they should be, and he understands the problems that he's creating right now that he's going to have to fix in a few minutes. And I am getting better at understanding the problems I'm making right now that I'm going to have to fix tomorrow.
Yeah. When
I look at them, right? So that's one of the rules that is super important. I'm like, all right, I'm doing this thing. He's like, did you do the 6-sided look? It's like, oh yeah, I only did 5 sides. He's like, yeah.
Right? Because he just knew from across the room.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are all those rules. And then there's the other rules, like safety third. And,
right.
No firearms.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Except for the cannon.
Except for the cannons.
That you shoot in the shop every once in a while.
Not anymore. There's a reason for every rule.
You know what? I mean, I run in... you made me leave to get it. So this is the thing I'm working on, right?
Yeah, we're going to do a show and tell, too. So,
yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, there's going to be 10,000 holes in it. But the point is learning the easiest way to make this, I had to develop the process to make it. Right? And in developing the process, I learned how the process changed the making, right? And so it is that same thing. So one technique to make this makes the whole thing constrict. So you have to start with a slightly bigger one because it's going to constrict. Another way of making it makes it slowly stretch, right? And I switched from doing one way to doing the other way. And so, long story short, a couple of pieces ended up too big. Okay, so now I got to cut them down, which I did, which meant I went from all of the places sitting on my hips properly, but then it's a little bit loose, so I want it to fit right. So I cut it down, so now everything doesn't quite fit on my hips properly. But then the armor is going to drag on it, which is going to probably solve that problem for me, so I probably don't have to worry about it. Right? And so there's, that same thing. It's just, you touch this breaks, you touch that, this breaks, you touch this breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep going until something's good enough.
Yeah.
Right. And the process of refinement in these crafts and this process improvement, right? It's not science.
No.
Right? It's not science. There's never this sort of expectation that you're doing things in a way that's like,
and they're not going to be historical if it is, right? So like this is one of the things that we've learned, right? If you engineer a sword, it's not going to be a historical sword.
No.
Right? So you can make generalizations, you can learn about things, but if you engineer that thing, it's going to be a modern thing.
And it's very lifeless.
And it's lifeless, and it's fundamentally different.
Yeah.
Than something that you've crafted.
Yeah.
With knowledge of originals. I think that's one of the interesting things is seeking the knowledge.
Right. So all of you have, and it's again because we're so informed by HEMA, right? And so the HEMA project is like direct engagement with historical sources. In the case of historical fencing texts. But in the case of these adjacent practices that you've picked up, you're using your HEMA chops to inform the way you do this, right? So like you're when you're garment making, you're like deeply interested in historical garment making and construction and patterns and etc., right?
Yeah.
Right. And so, and why is that? And you too, and obviously you are. And so like, why is that important? Like, why did you, I mean, it doesn't have to be important. If you don't want it to be important, it's not important, but like you've all chosen that it's important. Why?
In the case of armor relevant fabric pieces, right? I figure I'm not going to outsmart the smartest people that existed in Europe.
Sure.
Because I probably couldn't outsmart the ones that exist there now.
Sure.
So why would I presume I would have that capability then? Yeah? So I might as well just learn from them.
I like that a lot.
That's my thought.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, go.
I guess like I think a lot the scope of the stuff I do is actually a lot more limited than Jess's, right? Like I'm only like more than 2/3 of the stuff I make is just for me, and so I'm getting a very limited but also like deeply introspective line of like, this is my body, this is what I think my body is, I put it on myself, I learned that's not my body, right? Then I go back to the drawing board and I do it again. And so you see the like, you also like when you see someone, like when you see this, like, yeah, it's got this stuff, but you're seeing the iterative process, right? But you're also seeing the eye, right? Like you can't do something at a higher level until you've developed the eye to know that it's the better version, that you can iterate to it.
Yeah.
And so what you're seeing when you see the craft is also kind of the process and the judgment and the things that they think are good. That's one piece. So like for me, the idea of craft is very like introspective. I'm just making stuff for myself and how I want to do things. But there's another angle that's I'm not really like a broad tailor, right? That's not, I don't really make stuff for a lot, like not just anyone who asks, but then, the idea is like, I also had to engage with this bunch of this art that is contemporaneous with these HEMA sources that I think is also useful. It is useful, but it's also just valuable in its own right. It just makes this feel more alive. Like, hey, we're doing a thing that feels alive. There's just a spark that it gets, it gets into you somehow. You don't know how to describe it, but it ignites a fire in you. And a lot of my projects are thinking like, okay, how do I take that feeling and that little spark and bring it to someone? So, like if I, like, honestly, I'm just making clothes, right? Well, I mean, part of it could be aesthetics, right? And like silhouette, fabric, color. But part of it could also be function, right? How do I take the aesthetic and also make it inexplicably joined with the functional, right? And so one way is through arming garments, right? But another way that I've tried, another angle has been through light armor and concealed armors, because that generally tends to have a good, like Hema people will start to grok onto that because they're like, oh well, shoot, if I had chains in my arms, which just hint is where this is going, right?
Yeah.
Like then it becomes you cannot assess the aesthetic. You cannot assess the function of the object without considering the aesthetics. That's why I love the concealed armor ideas, right? You have to conceal it, and so its concealment is actually its aesthetic form is actually part of its function. And so now I take a fencer who has no knowledge of clothing, and I tell them this is a concealed armor garment. They're like, well, what does actual clothing look like? Come on in, and they're like, wow, that looks really cool. Like they arrive thinking they're going to learn about armor and swords and how to kill people, and there's a segue into aesthetic decisions. This is the clothing of the period. Here are the priorities that these people had when we see like them choose specific pieces of armor to hide on them, or like light armor.
Yeah,
I think that's super interesting, and it's like people always ask, why did that sword change that way, or why is that sword like that and not like that?
Yeah.
And what type of sword were they trying to make, or something like it was a sword, right? And so it has to work, but we don't know what exactly they wanted to do with it at that time. What does working mean?
Right.
What was its context? And the vast majority of the time that many swords were in use, they weren't being used, right?
Right.
A lot of them, like, you're wearing it.
Yep.
You're wearing it, right? And how it looks is super important. Sometimes how it looks is way more important than how it works.
Yeah.
Right? But often not. And when we have this limited selection of historical artifacts, which is this art, right? A few pieces of textile, right? From this time, or the population of extant swords, is we have no idea what the selection bias was for these.
Yeah.
Right. Except that like some were in churches, some were in the ground in places where they didn't go away, some were in armories. What made these ones stay? What are the ones like that didn't stay?
Yep.
Right. We have no idea why they made it look like that. Some things we can infer, like these spiked maces, like, or flails, right? There's a flail in the Metropolitan Museum. There's been a big controversy about whether it's actually 15th century or if it's Victorian fake and all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But like, we make a reproduction of it that's medium close. Medium. It's not super close, but it's medium close. And if you ever pick it up,
that's a technical term.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you ever pick it up, you're like, at the Ren Fair, like, people are always like, oh, dude. And they pick it up and they're like, whoa, this is so dangerous.
Yeah.
Like, what did they use this for? And it's like, I think they used it for riding into the tournament and holding, because people were like, whoa, that's so dangerous. Right? Because if you do anything with it, it hurts you. And you kill your horse. Like, for sure, if you try to use it. But like, we don't know.
Right. Exactly. I mean, we run into that question all the time, like with this garment, like even just today arriving. Oh, well, did they do all those holes so that they could point their armor wherever they wanted? Or is it for ventilation? Or is it for reinforcing the fabric? Or is it for, because it looks cool?
Yeah, maybe.
My answer is yes.
Right?
All of those. Why? A little of some, a little of the other. But I think a lot of us as modern people, at least modern Americans, want to disregard fashion. And I'm saying it again, and I've said it before. Fashion is absolutely central to humanity.
Sure.
It is what we do the most.
Every other species
Yeah.
Look at pecans.
Right. Exactly. So like, cause it looks cool is always the right answer.
I'm so interested in the neuroscience of fashion. Like I wanna learn. I wanna like go read whatever studies have been done on like when parts of the brain start to fail and people just don't care about the way they look anymore. You know what I mean? And if we can't like identify what part of the brain that belongs in.
But I don't. Well, that's a whole nother question. But what happens because we've probably all ran across at least one person in our life due to age or mental illness who reached that place, and we all intuitively find them dangerous and avoid them.
Yeah, right.
There's something, right? But like it hits a deep core.
Sure. Right. Either they don't care or they are so disconnected
right
from socioculture.
Yeah.
Right? That they think that's okay.
Right. And it becomes scary. They become scary. Yeah. So there's
antisocial.
Real shit there.
Right. Mm-hmm. There's some real shit in us. And like, you know, I'm always interested in the sort of cultural versus like biological, and like we were talking about linguistics the other day where it's like there is like in linguistics they look at the neuroscience of language because there's arguments that language is like purely cultural, and like they're mostly no one takes them seriously anymore, but for a little while that was a thing, and like they like found the parts of the brain where language works, and they can prove it because like if one part of the brain like shorts out or like becomes dysfunctional, then people can talk and they can talk coherently. Like they can speak grammatically correct, and they can use grammar correctly, but they can't actually form coherent ideas.
Yeah.
Right. So like the words coming out of their mouth are like coherent sentences. They're grammatically correct, but they don't mean anything. Right. And then there are other parts of the brain where it's like if that's left intact and this other part shorts out, then it's like the opposite, where they can get the content and you can hear the correct concepts or the correct words or whatever, but they can't form grammar, so it comes out like gibberish, right? Sure. And so like that's super interesting to me. Language is more than cultural, right? So I feel like it makes a lot of intuitive sense to me that there's got to be a place that our sense of fashion, and because language is a social thing, right? So like it's biological, it exists in our brains, it's neurological, but like it's a social thing. Like, is fashion something like that? Is fashion something akin to that? That's really an interesting thing to me. And I bet you it is, right? Because we do, like, you know, I don't know. I'm anyway, sorry. Okay, so yeah.
Well, I suspect that there probably is a biopsychosocial component, right? Like all three. Right. And like trying to separate out and say it's one or the other is a fool's errand, in my opinion. But right. That would be my thought.
Or it's a neurologist's errand.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like, any of us? No. All right.
Okay.
Well, right on.
So back to our crafting courses.
I actually had this conversation with Kaya way back when, talking about aesthetics and like why we should care about them. And I think my one-liner was basically people, and I was speaking specifically about men. Men care about aesthetics. They just don't want to admit it.
Yeah, and I honestly I think that's very cultural.
Yes,
like I think so.
That angle, like, and I think that creates a problem where they gravitate towards things that are cool, and then we'll slap a function on top afterwards.
Yes,
right, because and we've like that's where we really bonded. I think was like trying to get to the root of that. Like,
yeah. And this place here is a fascinating element of that. Like in the sword world, right. We all know there's different sword tribes.
Yes.
Right. And so like I found HEMA accessible because you wore black modern clothes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it wasn't dorky.
Right.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And this was
you are not alone.
This was important.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
But it's also super fucked up.
Right.
Yes.
Right? And now we're sitting here, I'm only wearing this because my divided hose and my braise and my my medieval stuff smells so bad and was hurting my back that I had to put on smart wool to survive, right? So I was wearing historical costume now, right? But learning about this fencing, right, and trying to dig down these holes is a pathway in certain ways to shifting, I think, many of our conceptualizations of what's sufficiently masculine or sufficiently feminine or sufficiently not nerdy,
right,
to be able to like swords.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So in some ways, like, a spec jacket made it okay to like swords.
Yep.
And now I'm like,
Get
Man,
me some split hose.
I'm wearing turn shoes. And it wasn't that long ago that I discovered that there were sword fighting events where people wore sneakers and people wore pointy shoes. I was like, those pointy shoe guys, what?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's deeply tied up with, I think, actually these whole ideas of Darwinian display and all kinds of things. But survival in a modern culture by being able to explore stuff and having a group you belong in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, I mean, no, man, that's your jam.
Oh, is
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think one of the things, like, okay, I'm dressed like this, right? But I don't fall into the tropes of, like, the parts that made the pointy shoe people inaccessible in the past, right? Which is the LARP aspect. Like, if you could identify those components that made it nerdy, the specific fantasy, like, I could have a persona, either like an SCA persona or a persona that the clothing imbues into me. But I really just try to be myself in these clothes and let other people understand that I am myself. Nothing has changed, and the parts that they find cool in the black gear HEMA culture are actually still cool here, right? Like, yeah, man, I'm gonna throw chains in here, right? And that's going to be awesome, right? Because if someone tries to assassinate me, I just and that, like, I'm going to fight them like Batman, and and that gives them that toehold that they need to find it acceptable, and also there's a degree of performance of myself that imbues this thing with a different character. I could have worn this today. Basically, for the viewers, I had dinner, at CFAS. I wore this thing, but I just otherwise was just like everyone else. But I could have worn this thing and like carried myself in like a noble manner, right? And
right,
yeah. Like you sense the posture change, the little muscles, but this is me, right? And I'm wearing the thing. But yeah, there's a sense in which there's a performance that goes with the object that is kind of like a delivery vehicle for certain aesthetic ideas, for ways to just get a toehold into people's brains.
So I have so much to say about all of this. I have so much to say about that in particular, and I want to spend time later talking about it. I do want to get us back, not on track necessarily, but no. What time are we at? Do we even know?
No, but it's been a minute.
Well, so we'll wrap it up here then, right? Well, I want to talk about how you've developed your craft, and and where you see yourself with regards to mastery, and how you might frame mastery based on your experiences. And we all have different experiences in this regard because we've all been exposed to different levels of competency and mastery in our given domains. But like, I want this to be, and maybe we won't have enough time today, but I want this to kind of be a launching point, because I feel like this craftsmanship is a metaphor for swordsmanship, right? Or it can be
pretty explicit.
And,
Yeah.
right. and I I endeavor myself to think about, and I've said it a number of times, right? Like I relate my experience of swordsmanship to my experience apprenticing, the de facto apprenticing for my dad, right, as a mason, as a master mason, right, and so I want to see if we can't articulate some aspects of craftsmanship and the development of our art and craft and the process by which we enhance our ability within our practices, right? And then, but see if we can't apply those aspects more directly as a metaphor for our swordsmanship. And so what I would say is like, where did you start and where have you come and what were the important things? So you've already kind of hinted at it, right? With your discussion of rules, right? But like, and then also we're thinking about mastery, like what specific challenges do you have as someone who doesn't come from a tradition where there's a living lineage of people who have reached the top of the mountain, right? And so you've had to carve your own path, right? Or like in your case, you do, right? You have people that are at a version of being
sure, although they didn't, right? And so like the other smiths here, right? And even though we mostly don't smite things that much today, but we'll call ourselves smiths or cutlers, right? We were talking a bunch about how like in 1980, no one made good swords.
Yeah.
Right? But there was a group of people who were kind of trying, and it's really not until the 90s that there's enough community. It's like HEMA, right?
Yeah.
That there's enough access to collections and that the Victorian baggage of the repackaging
the Victorian
of
period is responsible for
right.
all of the evil of the world.
I'll throw a lot on the 1950s America too, but continue.
Sure. Right. So it's not until then that enough has worked up.
Yeah.
Right. And so like for arms and armor, we didn't start making great swords until Chris and Craig went and knocked on Ewart Oakshot's door.
Yeah.
And, just hung out with him and made friends with David Edge at the Wallace Collection and all these people and just like actually held on to these things. And a community developed that was trying to use them.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can examine all kinds of historic originals and they're so different.
Yeah.
They're wildly different. Some of these are a millimeter thick, the last foot. And some of them are 5/16 of an inch because we're American. I'm going to mix measurement systems because I don't know what fraction of an inch a millimeter is, right? But we have no idea. So it takes all of this collaboration over decades. Now I can learn from people. But it was not the case until recently, right? Until us and Peter and Albion primarily. And Tinker and and a bunch of other people, Gus, started making these things, working together. But so it's a real recent thing that they're masters, and there's still way different ideas among a bunch of us that we talk about when we're having a beer together, because the internet's so trolly that if we say something about each other's work, stuff becomes stupid instantly. Instead of like, hey, why'd you do that? What are you doing? I'm curious. It becomes a flame war, and we're all too good friends to do that. Right? But so masters. Yeah, that didn't answer your question.
No, that was so great. I was like, I'm so glad that you shared that. But I'll kick it over to you, Jesse.
I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be talking about, but you know what I'm reflecting on? If we're tying it back to swords, which we are. Or the use of swords, I should say. So, Charles tasked me to teach you to make an eyelet. Because you're getting into armor, and you're going to have to fix your shit. And it's because you may not want to craft. You're going to have some craft to have armor. It's just a fact. Somebody else will show you how to set a rivet. That's not my job. And because I suck at rivets, but I do them. Anyways, eyelets I'm pretty okay at. So we did that. And one of the things, I don't remember whether you asked or whether I offered, was that the tension with which you're whipping is going to be variable dependent on the thickness of your fabric that you're working with, how big your hole is, the thickness of your thread you're working with, and that all of those are going to change every single time. And so ultimately, it's just fueling. There's just a feeling to it. Mm-hmm. And it's the exact same kind of question that comes up in swords all the time, where you'll be like, well, why am I going to durchwechseln rather than zucken? Why am I going to make that choice? And you're like, well, there's all of these unknowable things that are going to coalesce in a way that make a rule for you, but you're going to have to make up your own rule based on your own feel, based on you. Yeah? And then these external factors.
Right. And then through the process of like talking about it and talking through it, you might be able to say it in a way that accounts for more of that.
Right. I might have been able to express to you a rule about like how hard I wanted you to pull that while you were working on it.
Right.
But you seem to be doing sufficiently fine.
Right. In that
so
case,
I just let you
relevant.
be.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And the only right way to learn it is just to keep doing it until you develop your own rule.
Right.
Right.
Right. And so again, right. This is not science.
No.
Right.
No.
But it is a tradition. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like I like to think about these traditions as like this pre-scientific mode of transmission of knowledge. Right? Like it was a way that we could communicate
insofar as it predates science, but not insofar as science supersedes it.
No, well, right. I don't want to. Yeah, let's be careful. Be careful of what's loaded up in there. Right. So yeah. So like, because there's lots of arguments that you'll hear me make that suggest that it's a much better mode for transmission of bodies of knowledge. Right.
Well,
but you know.
And okay, but let me say this. So I had no masters in this, but what I did have was two great grandmothers who grew up in the Depression.
Yeah.
Who grew up sewing because you had to. And when I was a small child, my one great grandmother, sometimes you would color at grandma's house or sometimes you'd paint at grandma's house.
Yeah.
At that grandma's house, she would hand you pockets she had cut off grandpa's work shirts, like your pocket, right? When the shirt fell apart. And that she would hand you that pocket, buttons, colored threads, 4 different needles, and some scissors, and task you to create a creature.
Wow.
That's what I did at grandma's, and that's how I learned to sew.
That's so good.
Yeah.
That was a master.
Yeah.
Right.
And she let me apprentice at her table while she cooked dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? But it was through play and through feel. She never told me my creature was right or wrong.
Right. Those so like play and feel are like the tools of tradition.
Yeah.
Right. And observation. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. I think the angle that you've been taking is kind of like, what does it mean to not have masters? To be like, to just, you've got the image,
right?
You've got like a few fixed points, right? And then you have to kind of make it yourself. I have like YouTube tutorials, all It just and you realize like, okay, there's so much I'm not being told, right? And I have to go through the process and learn myself. And like, I don't know if I told you this, but like, it kind of is in my plan to do something similar, but like I assess also like there's a degree of craft in this, but there's also an enormous amount of art in that object, because of the effort involved, and the art is obvious in the impact it has on people, right? They immediately engage and it connects to something inside of them. And part of me, like, I approach it from two ends, right? Like, there is an art. I have like, I don't want to sound too, like, snooty about it, but it's like the idea is that I am trying to speak to people, right? And I don't want to use words. I want to make the object, and it'll be very obvious if you are listening appropriately what my thesis is, right? Or even if it's not, it will have the intended effect on you. And that's the object is just going to be my essay, right? There it is. And then there's the other part where it's like, I can't make the crazy shit I dream up, right? So I've got to like, I've got to look at my YouTube tutorials. I've got to futz through it. And I actually thought to myself, like, if I made a duplicate of this, like, just fit it to my body, right? Like, there's a small amount of iterative process there, but if I made a duplicate of it, if I went to Jess and said, Jess, what is the process? I will do the thing, right? Then that thing lacks the art. Yeah. It has all the craft. Right. Maybe, well, not all the craft, but like a portion of the craft, right? But in making the duplication, the effect is not the same. The statement that's created by the object is not the same, right? Because I am piggybacking off of the work, right?
Unless you're Marcel Duchamp, right?
Oh.
Who? I'm sorry.
So the idea is, like, I when I assess the object, it's like, okay, do I need the object for crafting purposes? But also, like, what is the actual artistic effect of the object, right? And like, like, I also see this, like, if you're making a piece of art here and you're thinking about what is its intended effect on the audience, right? And so, like, this actually connects to, Nathan, what you were saying about having an audience of swords people to, like, engage with, right? You create a model of sword or a design, and it has an impact on people, and they give you that feedback, and this object has that similar purpose. It ignites those questions and those ideas, and there's an artistic component to it that is, like, not the same if I were to do the exact same thing. There's certainly a craft component, and I'd be, like, good at making the eyelet doublet. But, so that's just part of the thing that's in my mind. I still might make it anyways, but I know that.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, like, because my thought is, I don't care what anybody else thinks about it.
I am super vain. I mean,
but, like, and I think there are two different. Okay, if we're thinking about the modern definition of an artist, there are two different. Maybe schools of thought, the artist or the poet or the whatever,
emotionally evocative, and
well, they're the artists that create because they have to create it for themselves, and there are artists who create to tell a story or to speak to.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
all art speaks.
Yes.
But sometimes the artist isn't trying to speak to you. They're trying to speak to themselves or to something they're trying to connect to. And so, like, that's what I was experiencing. You're talking, you're saying, oh, I want to speak out. And I'm like, no, I'm speaking in.
Yeah.
But it's still, but there's still a sense in which both of you are creating this thing to be, well, it's absolutely true that both of you are creating this thing so that it's appreciated for its aesthetic qualities. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I want it to be badass.
Right.
But, like, mostly
terrifying.
For me.
Right.
Yeah.
But then there's also there's like my sort of what I've been gravitating towards is this sort of pre-industrial understanding of art.
Yeah.
As sort of like any craft, right? Any craftsman or any crafting has a dimension of art, which is the dimension of discernment and taste.
Yes.
Right. So
this stuff can't be separated from, like, post or like Renaissance conceptualizations of high culture in our context. In other cultural contexts, there are other points.
Right. Because there's a reason that these things become conflated, right? Like, there's
absolutely,
the beauty of the but
and the social persona of the artist, right? So I said Duchamp because I'm pretty sure it's Duchamp that in one of his pieces of art was a gold-plated urinal.
Yeah.
Right. And then this other dude, somebody else, I can't remember, I believe, I could be wrong, made an identical gold-plated urinal,
Right.
And there was a significant artistic debate. Like, this gold-plated urinal is a critique of that gold-plated urinal,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, like,
Yeah.
Right.
it's art,
Same
right?
object,
Well-
different message.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
To tie it back to areas you're way more expert in is music.
Right.
And I watched it was a YouTube video, but it was an interesting discussion of how come in rap and hip hop it is uncommon to cover somebody's song, by which I mean the whole song.
Mm-hmm.
You don't rap somebody else's whole rap.
Right. Because the craft of rap
Right.
is the iterative process. That's the craft, and also that's the art.
Right.
Right. And so,
whereas you could take a bluegrass and cover it
Right.
all day long.
or any traditional folk or any
Yeah.
traditional folk songs or traditional music in my
like
in my
that's
case,
actually kind of the point.
because the art of those the art in those practices, right?
Yeah.
Is the elaboration.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's the taking the basic melody or theme or structure of the song and to change aspects of it.
Yeah.
Right. So when I'm formally teaching traditional music, the first thing I'm telling my students is like, okay, I want you to play these notes, right? Like, so play, so when I'm first teaching, I give them numbers, right? The numbers represent their fingers. Actually, you've taken lessons, so you remember this process, right?
While
So
I was taking breaks from making swords.
So you say like, okay, what we're going to do is you're going to play like 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
Right. That's all I want you to do. I just want you to play 3, 2, 1. Now, every one of those is its own individual skill.
Yeah.
Right. So moving from 3 to 2 is a skill. Moving from 2 to 1 is a skill. Moving from 1 back to 3, when you start playing it over again, that's its own skill.
Yeah.
Stopping in the middle, all that. You have to develop. Now, those are pretty easy skills to get a competency at, right? Like, you're an adult. You have basic motor skills. You can probably do this pretty effectively, right? Putting that into a rhythm is its own thing.
Yep.
And so you have to learn how to do that, right? Then you have to broaden the context. So you have to find a place in which you can take those new skills that you've learned, and you have to put something ahead of that and something after that.
Yeah.
And like that is a hard thing that you have to learn how to do.
Yeah.
Right. And nothing that I've said so far is art.
Right.
Right. So, and I'll teach a student to do this and to play through an entire sequence of notes that are the length of an entire song or track on a CD or whatever, right? And they still will not have produced any art.
Mm-hmm.
And we make that clear in our paradigm, right? Because the art of Irish music is what we do to those melodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, the first time I introduce art, I say, what I want you to do is when we get to this part of the tune, you know how to do this and you know how to do that, and I just want you to pick one.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I just want you to pick this or that. And so I'm limiting what the options are, right? But I am giving them some semblance of power to make a choice, right? So like art is fundamentally, from my perspective, the process of using your skills, your abilities, your knowledge, and your taste to make a choice in a particular moment. Right?
Yeah.
That's art.
Yeah.
Right? And that first introduction, when I'm saying like, okay, I want you to just play one of those two things. I want you to choose. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then often what will happen is they'll screw up there. Right? And so it's
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yeah.
fine, we got to go back to the craft. We got to bring that up. But then like once we get that up and they do that for the first time, it's a pretty simple choice. And it's not the highest art, right? But it is real art, right? Because it's really them seizing the moment,
Feeling it.
and feeling the moment, right? Being tethered to the moment, and being able to make a choice in that moment, right?
Yeah.
And that gets to the feeling too, right? Like, because you can't put your thing into rhythm if you're out of the pocket. You have to be like dialed in. You have to be focused on what you're doing, and that's the same truth about the stitching, right? And the eyelet making. And so, but like again, so, and it gets back to what you were saying about the art, and I love listening to how the beauty is intertwined, right? Because there's there's necessarily a beauty in the expression of those choices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That is inalienable to the process. Like, never mind the aesthetics, right?
Yeah.
So we've chosen, for me, it's almost like we've chosen the aesthetics after, right? Like we're saying, like, does that make sense? You know what I mean? Like it was because it was so masterfully done. That's why things used to be called masterpieces, right?
Yeah.
Like it was because it was so masterfully done at such a high level that it's so unbelievably beautiful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then we learn, like, oh, that's what beautiful looks like, and then we'll just have lots of those, right? Because we can just reprint them.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, that's wrong. That's not it. And it's not alive.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm just philosophy giggling.
Yeah. So art is alive.
For sure.
And so
For sure, because it's actively happening. It's a creative process.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to say something, but then we're going to wrap up.
Oh yeah, I was going to talk about like the smallest art you can do, right? And how it can be like very arty, like whatever that is, right? So one of the things I do for my friends is I make these things called Brent posts. But basically, the general gist of it is I take a manuscript image and I drop in as seamlessly as I can.
Yes.
Yeah.
An
image of my friend Brent, right? Just either on one face or all of the faces. So one of my recent, like, if I can be so humble to call it a masterpiece of Brent posting,
right,
was done while I was traveling. I didn't actually have a manuscript image, but I had seen an image of St. Teresa, and I was like, I can do that. And because I had this history, and I had a small audience of people, right, who knew that this was a thing that I did. I took his face and I put it into an image.
Mm-hmm.
Then it became very relevant that St. Teresa with the face of Jesus Christ on the veil. I made an image of myself as St. Teresa holding a veil and Brent's face on it. Right? And, and I did even more. I asked my friends, like, hey, I need donor images on the sides, right? And so on the side next to it, just like a medieval painting, I have them, in a classic donor pose. But it's like I had to make a lot of decisions.
Of course.
A lot of specific decisions. The pose, the gaze, his face. What are the poses that my friends will take? Where are they going to be positioned?
Yeah.
And, the scope of the audience is so tightly tailored, but the way that it is just intensely alive with meaning and context.
Exactly. Well, and the thing is, like, I could make a Brent post. It would take me nothing to make a Brent post.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the moment you or anyone in your audience saw it, you'd be like, that's trash. Like, what happened to Charles? Like, where did this come from? What, like, is G drunk or something? Right. But the truth is, I just have no art, right? Like, I just don't have, because I don't have any competency, because I've never actually gone through the process. So I haven't learned all of these little aspects that are totally integral to doing this well.
Oh,
right? Like, all I can see is, like, I don't know, it's an image.
There's that dude.
There's that dude
again.
Right?
Yeah.
But it would be obvious to everybody, right?
Yeah.
Like, it would be totally
obvious.
And what's
And to be very clear,
yeah,
if you show a Brent meme to a normie,
yeah,
they are so confused.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I have tried to share Brent memes, and my husband's like, "What is happening?
Right.
It's why are you laughing?" And I'm like, "This is the funniest thing I've ever seen."
This
It's
is
like,
so
no.
amazing.
Yeah, it's almost like I send out the bat signal, and only a few people can see it, and that's and the joy it sparks in them is like, then I found my people.
Yeah.
Because the people who see that, they'll, like, even if you don't know who Brent is or who I am, they'll see the whole thing and they'll be like, that's a pretty good photo of, like, St. Teresa with some donors on the side. Like, clearly this guy has seen some medieval paintings and has put some effort into recreating it. And, like, that that is the kind of person I'm speaking to as well.
Yeah.
And so like you're able to kind of assemble these groups of people that normally do not interface with each other at all.
Yeah.
Right? Like the Black Hema, Panthema group, like, which is, like, loosely speaking, kind of where CKDF is grounded in, where it has its history. But you bring them in, and you bring in people who are just like, wow, that's a great image of St. Teresa, like, and you kind of bring them together around a single object or a focal point, and that's like a way to assemble people you wouldn't otherwise.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so one more, and then the final word will go to you.
Oh,
I think I'm good.
Great.
I like the Brent post. Although I don't know who Brent is.
Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah.
I haven't met Brent. I don't.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I adore
Maybe
him.
I've run across him.
Yeah.
I don't think
Someday you
we've
will.
definitely not hung out.
He belongs in those memes.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome.
So wrap it up.
What am I wrapping up? Well, I mean, I tried strongly by making the statement "art is alive" to wrap it up, but then we had to talk more. So,
Art was alive,
thought
and
that
now
was
it's
it.
over.
Art is dead. No, this was awesome. This was awesome. I have a lot more thoughts about all of it now.
We could talk all night,
We actually could.
But
We're
the
actually
hot-
going to.
but
Right.
I assume we're going to in the hot tub.
Yeah, we're gonna go
yeah,
in the
yeah,
hot tub
hot
now.
tub sounds awesome.
So that's
With
what
that-
we're gonna do now, and we could probably goodbye.
Thank you guys.
Peace out.
Well done.
You too.
Yeah.
We didn't
That's
tell
not
the Happy story, but
Oh, but